Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 56, and we are going to talk about Megan Rapinoe. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Then we're going to talk about the all-male immigration phenomena. And then we're going to talk about how power corrupts absolutely, using Jane Elliott's blue eye, brown eye experiment. So let's talk about Megan Rapinoe. I don't really follow soccer, and I certainly don't watch women's soccer. I don't even watch men's soccer. But apparently the controversy is that she recently missed a penalty shot, or what do you call it, overtime, sudden death, shoot off, whatever they call that thing. And she tried to hit a very difficult corner of the goal shot, but she missed the goal. Now, even if you take a shot like that, because even if the goalie guesses right in terms of correctly which side of the goal that you're going to go for, even if they guess correctly, it'll be nearly impossible for that goalie to block the shot that's going into that corner. Now, I don't really play soccer. I think the last time I played soccer was in fifth grade, or football if you're European. But I played lacrosse, and there are a lot of situations where you go one-on-one with the goalie. And I think it's a little different in lacrosse, but if you're one-on-one with the goalie, I think it's like 1 out of 100 times you're not going to be able to score. Now, in practice sessions, when you do one-on-one with the goalie, people are going to do these sort of fancy trick shots, and so the probability of missing becomes a lot greater. But if you're one-on-one with the goalie in lacrosse, I mean, that's like a gimme, right? It's like almost guaranteed that you're going to score. All you have to do is throw a fake or two, and then you score. So, but obviously in soccer or football, it's a little bit more difficult. It's a little trickier. And as other people have pointed out, other players also missed that that shot, right? Because you have like 7 kickers, I guess, per team, and then you take turns to see, how many points you have at the end. So why all the hate? Why all of the shade being thrown at Megan Rapinoe? And I think it's because of the things that she says, the things that she uh, basically strived for, which is, I guess, equal pay. Also, she doesn't acknowledge the national anthem of the United States too, which was embarrassing to a lot of people, especially very nationalistic, I love America type people. That's almost embarrassing, kind of shameful, especially because people in other countries see that and begin to create a generalization or a racialization about people in America, or at the very least, women soccer players, right? So there's that, and she's supposed to be representative of the country. So in a situation like that, you're not really representing yourself, you're representing the country, right? And if you didn't like the country, you don't play for the team. So there's that kind of thing, right? So you hate the country, but you're still going to play for a team that represents the country, et cetera, et cetera. So you have that kind of thing. But still, some people wonder about all of the sort of negativity towards her for missing a simple shot like that. I don't think it's called a penalty shot. It's what do you call it? A shoot off. I don't know. Shows my soccer knowledge. I should probably just look it up right here. So I just Googled it, and they call it a penalty kick. I didn't realize that's what it was. But in any case, I think it's a case of schadenfreude, right? So taking pleasure in the misfortune of others. I would add that especially it's against a person who's been saying things which goes against what other people believe. And even though they're representative of the United States, they're saying things which many perceive as un-American. And so when you do that kind of behavior, when you engage in that kind of behavior where you're going to criticize something, it puts a lot of pressure on you to be perfect, right? So when you do something like that, are highly critical, of people or behavior, then people are going to turn around and impose a very high standard in return. And so anything that Rapinoe did, uh, anything short of perfection was going to be heavily criticized. And so to end her career on a missed penalty shot, well, that just, let the deluge begin. So it's possible, though, that maybe she could have handled it differently, instead of using, her soccer moment as a political platform to wait till after she's done playing soccer. But while she is playing, for her to be so vocal in that way, well, you have to expect the kind of schadenfreude that we're seeing now, right? So people taking pleasure in the fact that she didn't do so well, right? That is a natural human phenomena. I don't blame people for doing it. I do caution people to criticize the skill. I think what even might have bothered more people, I thought it was kind of strange that she smiled or even chuckled after she missed. I don't know. I haven't watched a lot of soccer, and maybe that's a normal thing. But if I had missed a shot, I'd been pretty upset with myself. And so I think it was a weird response also for missing. So there's that. So I think it's a lot of schadenfreude, people taking advantage of the opportunity to dump on her. But if you think about it, she kind of brought it on herself by saying the things she did while she was in the position that she was in. The next topic I wanted to look at is the all male immigrants to anywhere phenomena, right? So we'll see it in Europe, where a lot of the people crossing the Mediterranean, these boats, they're all male. There's no children, there are no females in the boat. We see this also coming up out of Mexico. A lot of people are young males and no one else. And so, I felt kind of uncomfortable when people were saying things like this. On the one hand, okay, I see what they're saying. But on the other hand, well, that's kind of how it used to be. When my father came to the United States, it was pretty much mostly single people, right? Okay, there were women too, because the United States was only interested in allowing skilled workers to come into the United States. So there was a strict quota system. Only a certain number of Asians could come into the United States every year. And so if you were, one of the chosen few, you had to be one of the skilled workers. My father-in-law was an engineer, and my father came as a student, on a student visa. So you couldn't bring a family because there was no one to support you. And if you were going to come into the country, you needed to have a sponsor as well. So how are you going to get a sponsor if you've never been to the country? And so there's that kind of difficulty, a very high barrier to cross. In the case of my father, he got engaged like a week or two before he came to the United States, and was separated for 4 years, and then finally was able to reunite with his fiance. But she couldn't come right away because he had to be able to support her. And he was a full-time student. There was no way that was going to happen. And so after he was able to secure some steady employment and he was able to prove that he could support a family, that's when my mom was able to come to the United States. My father-in-law, who came to the United States a little bit later, couldn't bring his family. So he already had my wife, his daughter. She was 2 years old, but they couldn't come to the United States because he had to secure a living, right? And unless he was able to do that, he couldn't bring his family to the United States. And I believe, if I remember the story correctly, she wasn't able to come to the United States until she was, I believe, 2 years old, maybe a little bit older. But they were separated for a while, and it was kind of difficult in that way. Now, why was that? Because there were no welfare programs, right? There was no government handouts for them to be able to rely on. There was no free housing. There was no, guaranteed food or anything of this nature. You had to figure it all out yourself. Now, some people might think that that was kind of cruel, but remember, we didn't have inflation the way that we have it today. And so a lot of people would save money before coming to the United States, and they would save enough money to be able to have enough time to secure the job, or they came to the United States because they secured a job first, got the visa, the work visa, came to the United States, and then went from there. So this phenomena of only one person coming is kind of normal, at least in my community. And so having entire families move to the United States, that didn't happen until much, much later. And that's when the immigration laws had already changed. And then more recently, because the welfare laws have changed dramatically, so people who came to the United States did not necessarily have to work. So it's interesting that you see people, kind of being upset that it's only young men. And obviously the reason for examining that is for, that there's something kind of weird going on there, especially now that we see incidents of assault, sexual assault, rape, that kind of stuff happening all over Europe. Well, then people are even more triggered, shall we say, by looking at that phenomena. But, immigration law is very, very flawed anyway. Human trafficking, the phenomena, whether you believe in child trafficking or not, depending on whose statistics that you're looking at. But trafficking, in terms of crossing borders, only exists because of immigration laws. And so if you want to do something about human trafficking, then you have to examine immigration laws. And then the welfare state here in the United States is also problematic, right? And so open invitation to anyone who can make it across the border. Well, who's going to pay for them? Who's going to pay for their housing? Who's going to pay for their education, the health care? And we can see the problem in New York, right? So when it was just Texas's problem or Arizona's problem, no one really cared too much. But now that they sent all the immigrants to other northern states, then they begin to see just how expensive it is. So who's going to pay for all of that? That becomes a problem. Prior to a lot of these immigration issues that we see, or even with, the natural immigration ebb and flow was largely influenced by employment opportunity here in the United States. So I remember something like 5 years ago, the net migration from Mexico or down south of the border to the United States was negative. In other words, more people were leaving the United States than were trying to come in. And it's because the employment that people used to acquire once they came to the United States, it wasn't there anymore. And so why bother coming to the United States? And so that's what we want as more of a determining factor of whether or not people are coming in or going. All right. And so a lot of issues to consider. It's far more complicated than anyone can pretty much imagine. But the starting point will have to be getting rid of welfare. And so anyone who even thinks about coming to the United States, they realize that they have to get a job to support themselves, right? Otherwise, they're not going to try to make the trip. The last topic I wanted to examine is this idea of power corrupting absolutely. I think I was talking to one of my kids, and we were talking about how, why is it that this kind of thing, corruption in seats of power, why does it happen? Lord Acton, of course, said that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And absolute power, I think, without close research, sort of denotes the lack of accountability, right? So you can do anything you want because no one can bring charges against you or claim that you are unjust. One of the videos that I used to show when I was, this was a long time ago. More recently, I haven't been showing it, but it was Jane Elliott's Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes controlled experiment, right? It was an experiment, but she was very much overseeing the entire experiment. And the way she tells it is that after Martin Luther King was assassinated, she was trying to teach racism to her all-white, predominantly Lutheran third grade class, and they couldn't get it. And so she came up with this idea of dividing the class into blue-eyed students and brown-eyed students. And so one day they all walked into class and she said, okay, so today the blue-eyed students, they have the power to run the class. And so they get to write any rule that they want. And all the brown-eyed kids have to wear a collar, like a green felt collar, cloth collar, and they have to wear that all day long and do whatever the blue-eyed kids told them that they had to do. And so the blue-eyed kids just went to town. They started writing all of these laws and regulations and rules that the brown-eyed kids had to follow, and they loved it. And the problem is, see, the crazy thing is that all of these kids grew up in the same neighborhood. It was a small town, right? And so they were friends. Not at the end of the day. I mean, they wrote so many oppressive rules, like they have to be last in line. They don't have first dibs on any of the recess toys or anything like that. All right, so that was the first day. The second day, everyone walks in and Jane Elliott says, okay, now the brown-eyed kids have the power and the blue-eyed kids have to wear the collar. So it was a role reversal. And so what you saw in these little third graders, revenge, right? They wanted to get back at all of those other people. And they wrote equally oppressive, but maybe even more extreme rules. I don't remember exactly all of them, but it kind of went down. It was so bad that Jane Elliott called one of the kids Little Hitler, right? He was just so, taking advantage of this ability to write rules that other people have to follow. It's a pretty powerful video. It's free. You can watch it on YouTube for free. I used to show it every semester, and now I feel pretty guilty for having showed it for a couple of years because it's manipulative, because anyone with power like that will abuse it. So she was trying to illustrate racism, but really all she did was show what happens when you give people power, even third graders, right? You don't have to be some kind of hardcore racist. No, it's more about power and having the power to be able to control other people. We see this in other experiments, the Stanford prison experiment, where these people, they say, okay, we're just going to have this little social experiment. Some people will be guards and other people would be inmates. And people got into their roles. And so the prison guards, started abusing all of their authority. You see this in older siblings, families which have multiple siblings, and there's a lot of competition there. You see that same power dynamic appear there. And so therefore, when you look at politicians who have no accountability at all, right? They can do all of the corrupt, evil things, accept bribes, write laws which exempt their own criminal behavior. All of that, it gets pretty bad very quickly. And in the pre-internet days, it would probably politicians could have done this and gotten away with a lot of it. But nowadays, because information travels so quickly, it's a lot harder for politicians to sort of sneak on by, sneak their corruption past everybody else. And so the issue or the focus should be the power, not racism, not, white supremacy. It's power. It's arbitrary, and then it's protected by the rules of the experiment or the system, right? And so Jane Elliott, she controlled the rules, and then she gave the power to the kids to make even more rules. And so the rules are the rules. And so you got to follow them. There's no space in there for pushback. There's no way to argue or to rebel or to seek, what do you call it? Correction. It's very, very difficult to do that even in a controlled situation. So if you look at politics and government, where there's little to no accountability. I mean, think about what government does when someone is suspected of doing something wrong. They appoint special counsel to try to get to the bottom of things. And people like Ron Paul, they say, whenever you hear someone say they're going to appoint a special counsel, it's a cover-up operation. And so there is no accountability in government. We just pretend there is. And when there is that kind of power, it will corrupt. Absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're a good person or if you think you're doing something for humanity's sake or some kind of moral, virtuous end. It doesn't matter, because the people who are wielding that power, they will be corrupt, right? And especially since they have the power to write laws and they can influence the Supreme Court, which determines whether laws are constitutional or not. Then this whole system is rigged and there is no accountability at all. And that explains more of what we're seeing today rather than racism. I would even argue that the whole, focus on white supremacy and racism is a way to hide the fact that it's the power that's the problem, the power with no accountability. Well, those are the 3 topics for this episode, and I will see you. Oh, I forgot. I was going over the episodes, and there are 4 episodes which I thought I had uploaded, but it turns out I had skipped them, at least on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And so over the next couple of days, I'm going to be uploading them, so anyway, to make sure that they're all up there anyway. So I will talk to you in the next episode.